And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, meteorologist Joel Curtis with your aviation weather. Forecast issued Friday, October 17th. Starting out with our flying weather on Saturday morning. Extensive IFR along the Beaufort Sea coast all the way over to Utqiagvik. Most of the northern areas in marginal VFR. Some IFR along the far western portion of the Seward Peninsula. IFR across a lot of the central interior for the snow that's going on there. And then also certainly for the western slopes of the Alaska Range, as well as some of the eastern slopes on down into the eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula. Wrangell St. Elias Mountains for IFR, much of the Gulf under marginal VFR, off of Dixon Entrance, some IFR. And then out in the Bering Sea, two areas of IFR, one in the central Aleutians, the other one's in the far western part of the Bering Sea. For Saturday afternoon, IFR again along the Beaufort Sea coast, some of it in the Chukchi Sea. Certainly the western part of the Brooks Range got some IFR conditions, lots of marginal VFR across the northern tier. And then we have some IFR conditions over the central interior down to the Alaska Range, marginal VFR in the far eastern sections near the Alcan border. Some scattered to isolated thunderstorms off of Haida Gwaii and Dixon Entrance. Also, we have some marginal VFR into southeast Alaska. IFR over the northern section of Nunivak Island and down through the very southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, as well as marginal VFR for much of the Aleutians and some IFR in the central Aleutians. Then for Sunday morning, IFR again in the Beaufort Sea, much of it in the North Slope, as well as down into the Brooks Range. Also some marginal VFR to IFR conditions over the eastern interior. IFR conditions moving up along the southwest coast, probably just offshore, but maybe a little bit inland too. And then marginal VFR for much of the eastern Bering Sea, as well as IFR conditions from the Pribilos on down through the eastern Aleutians, and some marginal VFR for southeast Alaska, as well as out in the Gulf. And then for Sunday afternoon, lots of conditions have raised up, marginal VFR for much of the North Slope, eastern Brooks Range, all across the Beaufort and into the Chukchi Sea. Some IFR right through the Bering Strait, a little bit of IFR in the Gulf of Alaska, and a little bit of IFR for the far western Aleutians. Otherwise, marginal VFR for much of the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska, and some marginal VFR for the eastern interior. So now for our past conditions on Saturday. Anaktuvik, VFR with some marginal VFR in the area surrounding that area. And then same thing for Adigan Pass, VFR, but marginal VFR for the areas around Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill, starting out as IFR, but things should really improve up to VFR by Saturday afternoon. Rainy Pass, IFR becoming VFR. Windy Pass, IFR expected all day with the upslope conditions there. Isabel Pass, IFR. Metasta Pass, VFR becoming marginal VFR in the afternoon. Tahitna Pass, IFR becoming marginal VFR later in the day. Portage Pass, IFR becoming VFR. Chilkoot and White Pass, VFR. For our freezing level Saturday morning, first of all, we have surface for much of the mainland portion of the state in the northern part of southeast Alaska. And then with a little bit of a temperature inversion for right along the Gulf Coast. Otherwise, 2,000 feet as you go out the Alaska Peninsula and on into the Bering Sea. And then the really warm air is about up to 4,000 for the Prince of Wales Island, and then it ramps up to 10,000 feet off the Vancouver Island. So for our icing on Saturday, We have a couple of areas of considerable moderate on the central interior due to the snow. And then we also have some over the eastern Brooks Range and down into the central interior. And that's about 2,000 to 8,000 feet. Then we have freezing level to 8,000 feet for the Panhandle in the morning, considerable moderate for much of the Panhandle, and isolated moderate for the rest of it. Some thunderstorms off of Haida Gwaii again, and so indicated scattered TCU and isolated CBs up to flight level 220. Then a couple of areas like St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew, 2,000 to 8,000 feet, and also down into the Dutch Harbor area a little bit, again 2,000 to 8,000, and then for the far western Aleutians, some considerable moderate moving in, 4,000 to 14,000 feet. So for our jet stream, that's been steering all the weather systems now of lately, and it's probably going to persist maybe all the way into the next week. Westerly flow all the way up to 160 knots, way south of the Gulf. But the main thing is that the steering mechanism is generally westerlies until you get to British Columbia, where then it becomes southwesterlies. For our 9,000-foot winds on Saturday, got an upper level low off the Panhandle, but most of the wind activity is to the south. So 45 to 55 knots there. Also some southwesterlies coming up through the Bering Strait up to about 40 knots or so. And then the rest of the wind is south associated with the jet stream. Now for our 30,000-foot winds on Saturday, again that low off of Dixon Entrance, 45 to 60 knots offshore, a little bit of outflow for the Cape Spencer area, up to about 20 knots or so. Otherwise, a little bit of southwesterlies going up through the Bering Strait, up to 40 knots, but most of it's fairly light, up to maybe 25 or so. And then a little bit out in the Aleutians, generally northerlies. So that sets up our turbulence, first of all, indicating the thunderstorms off of Haida Gwaii again. Most of the northern part of that eastern area of turbulence, as you see, is mostly in the morning. That'll be surface to 12,000 feet, so it's a pretty deep layer. Then we have surface to 6,000 feet south of there, way out in the Gulf though, and then a little area of well south of the Aleutians, surface to about 10,000 feet. So that's your flying weather. Be sure to file a flight plan out there. There's a lot of traffic with the recovery, the response and recovery for ex-Typhoon Halong. And so for southwestern Alaska, look out for all that traffic. There's a lot of flying out there, and so please be safe. Thank you.